He swiftly pulled on the black stockings and stepped on the gas. Instantly, a steel wire shot up from the bridge, leaving the armored car no chance to avoid it and causing it to plunge to the ground. The robbers quickly floored the accelerator and hooked the steel doors open with their car. Then they charged in with automatic rifles, swiftly taking control of the guards who were still dazed, but what they couldn't figure out was why the robbers targeted this armored car, which was heading to the bank with no cash on board. One robber swiftly ran under the bridge and pulled down the sunshade, revealing an identical armored car. They immediately removed the GPS from the original vehicle. They had 1 minute to install it on their own vehicle, otherwise, the command center would sound the alarm. The female robber then changed into a uniform, lowered the gas in a sports car, and the fake armored truck followed behind at a steady pace. As they neared the bank, the female robber veered into a nearby underground parking garage. According to the plan, they arrived at the vault entrance. They handed the guard the credentials through a hole in the door, but the guard, after a quick glance, walked away. "You rascal, I don't have time to talk here." We remained silent. The guard soon returned with a serious expression and approached them. "Come on, thanks." Just like that, they smoothly entered the vault, then quickly put on their masks again. They jumped out, taking the staff hostage and attaching a bomb to the door, hiding behind the armored car afterward. The vault's alarm blared, and as expected, the door was blown open. One of them rushed inside to grab the cash while the other two stood guard and kept watch. Soon, their accomplice threw out 3 large bags of cash. Each of them grabbed a bag, then set fire to the armored car. According to their plan, they moved to another wall and planted 2 more bombs. The female robber skillfully drifted her car into position, reversing it to where her accomplices stood. They quickly tossed the bags into the trunk and drove off nonchalantly, much to the disbelief of onlookers. A woman pulled out her phone to call the police, but a dark gun barrel was soon pointed at her. 3 masked figures emerged from nowhere, brandishing automatic rifles. A massacre unfolded in the parking lot. In just 20 seconds, everyone was dead, and the robbers were completely unaware of what had just transpired. They stuck to their plan, changing into brand new suits, setting off improvised Molotov cocktails, and driving off in 2 different cars. They thought they could finally live a life of luxury. But little did they know, the real trouble was just beginning. That evening, as Frank drove out of town, 2 police cars suddenly appeared behind them. His sidekick poked his head out and fired wildly at the police, but the police weren't fazed. Instead, they accelerated toward them. His sidekick, in a panic, threw a canister of nails at them. The police cars were forced to stop as expected, but Frank wasn't happy. He couldn't understand how they had been exposed. As they grew increasingly anxious, a row of headlights suddenly shone on their faces. The car behind couldn't avoid a crash. Frank's sidekick woke up first, grabbing his weapon and engaging in a fierce firefight with the police. The gunfire woke Frank up too. He stumbled out of the car and, under his sidekick's cover, managed to escape the encirclement, only to be shot and killed by police fire. Seeing this, Frank jumped off the bridge, landing in a dumpster, barely escaping with his life. The next day, the district attorney held a press conference, revealing that 8 people had been killed in the parking lot, including the woman, who was actually Frank. She was a judge, investigating a criminal organization from 30 years ago. Just a week ago, she had arrested one of its members. But at this critical moment, she was murdered in the parking lot. The authorities then identified Frank and his group as members of the organization, and robbing the bank was just a cover. Their real goal was to kill the judge and cut off the police's leads. Frank sat in front of the TV, bewildered. They had indeed robbed the bank, but they hadn't hurt anyone from start to finish. Clearly, someone was trying to frame them. Frank decided to investigate the truth once the heat died down, so they wouldn't be used by those pulling the strings. But as soon as he stepped out of the car, a large group of police officers surrounded him. Just like that, Frank was taken to the police station in a daze. Faced with the police's accusations, he broke down and shouted. At that moment, the police chief took out a report. "This is the weapon you used to kill the judge. How do you explain this?" Speechless, Frank was thrown into prison. But he didn't plan to just sit there waiting, because he had received inside information. Vic was planning to help him break out. That night, a fellow inmate lit a cloth on fire to distract the guards. Frank used a wire to hook onto a cloth hanging from upstairs, and inside was a phone. He quickly called Vic to discuss the next step of their plan. The next morning, a prison guard suddenly barged into Frank's room. Frank grabbed a package from the table, listening carefully at the door until all went silent outside. Only then did he open the package and confirm it contained a bomb. He cautiously lifted a floor tile and placed the bomb underneath. Just then, footsteps echoed down the corridor. Frank quickly put away his tools and grabbed a towel. When the guard came in to call him for lunch, he found Frank doing push-ups on the floor. He narrowly escaped suspicion. That afternoon, Vic came disguised as a Middle Eastern woman for a visit, but in the next moment, Vic pulled out a shotgun and pressed it to the guard's head. Then he attached a bomb to the main door and dragged the guard behind the wall. With a loud explosion, the prison doors were blown open, and a piercing alarm rang through the air. At the same time, the female robber drove straight into the prison, shooting out the chains at the gate and taking the guards hostage as they entered. Seeing this, the remaining guards dropped their weapons. Upon hearing the alarms, Frank knew the operation had started. He used a mattress as a shield and blasted open the cell door with a bomb, then took a guard hostage. The two groups met up quickly, but in the next second, Vic forced a guard to open the cell holding the criminal organization members. Frank, confused, watched as Vic explained that with these members as hostages, the police wouldn't dare shoot. They cautiously moved to the exit, only to find the outside surrounded by police. To block the sniper's view, they each held up black umbrellas as shields. Vic then pulled the pin on a grenade and warned that if he let go, no one would leave alive. The police chief immediately took cover. As the standoff continued, a prison guard stepped forward and offered to replace Frank's hostage. It turned out that the guard had long been suspicious. He had secretly been investigating the criminal organization and had noticed a tattoo on one of its members. The tattoo matched the one on the police chief's arm. The guard knew he needed to protect Frank to uncover more clues. They forced the organization member to lie on the car's windshield and brazenly drove out. Surprisingly, the police didn't stop them. Just as they thought they were about to escape, disaster struck. There was no time to argue as a helicopter hovered overhead, tracking their every move. Following the plan, they entered a tunnel where new cars were waiting. But as Vic approached the car, a bullet suddenly shot out from inside, and a masked figure ambushed them, catching them completely off guard. The female robber tried to drag the injured Vic back, but the masked figure snuck up and attacked her. Watching this, Frank was consumed by grief. In a rage, he threw the grenade he had been holding and engaged in a fierce shootout with the masked figure. Little did he know, the police chief had quietly snuck up from behind and aimed his gun, not at Frank, but at the female officer. Luckily, she was wearing a bulletproof vest and was unharmed. Amid the chaos, she jumped into a car, taking two others with her and fleeing the scene. On the way, Vic, sensing his end, revealed the truth. He had been bribed by the police chief to kill the female judge during the bank robbery and betray Frank's location. Finally, during the prison break, the plan was to eliminate the remaining organization members. Everything had been orchestrated by the police chief, but Vic never expected to become the next target. Watching his last ally die, Frank swore to take revenge on the police chief. Just then, the female officer suddenly grabbed the gun from his waist. Realizing he couldn't take revenge alone, Frank agreed to her terms. They then drove to the home of the district attorney, a man known for his ruthless pursuit of justice. If he learned the truth, he would surely bring the police chief to justice. However, not long after the female officer entered the house, the police chief arrived with his men. Frank quickly snuck out of the car and entered through the back door, but what he saw left him in shock. The district attorney and the police chief were working together. It became clear that the old criminal organization had transformed into powerful figures in society. Realizing the situation was dire, Frank withdrew. As they prepared to take the female officer away, he started the car to create a distraction. Though he ran over the police chief, killing him instantly, the female officer was also tragically killed. Without an ally, Frank was now free of his shackles. He vowed to exact revenge in his own way. The next day, he followed the district attorney on his motorcycle, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He then handed over the evidence the female officer had gathered to hundreds of law enforcement members. He believed that among them, someone would be just and bring both him and his fallen allies the justice they deserve, fulfilling the female officer's dying wish.